Gusu Lan clan was located deep inside the mountains, outside the city of Gusu. Surrounded by a picturesque arrangement of gardens, pavilions, and rivers, the residence's black roofs and white walls were shrouded in mist year-round, a paradise floating atop a sea of cloud. The first glimmers of dawn shone through the early morning fog, perfectly complementing the place's name, the Cloud Recesses. The mountains were silent, and the people were silent, their hearts and minds like still water. The only noise was the sound of bells echoing from the high tower. Though the Cloud Recesses was no Buddhist temple, the same lonely and meditative air pervaded its cold peaks. But suddenly, the atmosphere was disrupted by a long cry, startling many disciples who were in the midst of their morning reading or sword practice into shivers. They were unable to stop themselves from peering toward the main entrance, the source of the noise. Wei-wuxian stood before the gate, crying and clinging onto his donkey. Lan Jingyi said, "Why are you crying? You're the one who said you like Han Guangjun. Now he even brought you home. So what are you howling for?" Wei-wuxian's eyebrows were wrinkled, his lips frowned, and his face was a perfect picture of misery. After the night at Dafan Mountain, he hadn't had a single opportunity to re-summon Wen Ning or to investigate why Wen Ning had lost his conscious awareness. Even less did he know why his old right-hand man had returned to the mortal world, yet Lan Wangji had already taken him back home. When Wei-wuxian was young, he and the junior disciples of the other clans had been sent to the Lan clan for 3 months to receive instruction, during which he had personally had a taste of the Gusu Lan clan's oppressive dullness. He was still suffering from lingering trauma caused by the 3,000+ clan rules etched in cramped lines over the entire surface of the wall of discipline. Earlier, when he was being hauled up the mountain like a captive, he had glanced at that rock wall as they passed, only to find out another 1,000 rules had been added. Now there were over 4,000. 4,000. Lan Jingyi said, "All right, stop being so noisy. Making a racket is prohibited inside the Cloud Recesses." Wei-wuxian was making a racket because he didn't want to enter the Cloud Recesses. Once he was dragged inside, escape would be difficult. Back when he had come for the lectures, every clan's disciples had been given a jade token, which they kept on their person in order to freely enter and exit. Otherwise, there was no way to pass through the barrier surrounding the Cloud Recesses. Over 10 years had passed since then, so security could only have grown tighter. Lan Wangji stood silently before the mountain gate, watching Wei-wuxian with a cool, detached gaze, turning a deaf ear to his wailing. He waited for them to dampen and then said, "Permit him to cry. Once he tires, bring him in." Hugging the little donkey, Wei-wuxian cried even more pathetically and smacked his head into his animal companion a few times. Too cruel. He had believed that getting whipped would clear him of any suspicion, and thus had been momentarily filled with smug glee. His runaway mouth, always quick to tease, he had even embarrassed Lan Wangji. But who knew that the man's reaction would be worlds away from what it had once been? What sense was there in that? Was it possible that after so many years, not only had his level of cultivation increased tremendously, but so had his narrow-mindedness? Wei-wuxian said, "I like men. Your clan has so many beautiful men. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. Lan Sidre tried to reason with him. Young Master Mo, Hung Guangjun actually brought you here for your own good. If you hadn't come with us, Chief Zhang wouldn't have let you go. Over the past several years, he's caught and dragged countless people back to Lotus Pier and tortured them for information. He's never let anyone go. Lan Jingyi said, "That's right. You've probably never seen Chief Zhang's methods yourself. They're downright cruel." At this point, he remembered the prohibition against talking badly about someone behind their backs and snuck a glance at Lan Wangji. Only upon seeing that Han Guangjun had no intention of punishing him did he dare to continue muttering, "It's all the Yiling Patriarch's fault for stirring up trouble. So many people are copying him instead of learning cultivation properly. Not to mention, Chief Zhang suspects everything that moves. If he tries to catch everyone, when will he ever be done? And look at yourself, playing your flute like that. Humph." This humph said more than 1,000 words. Wei Wuxian felt the need to defend himself. This, really, I mean, if I told you, you might not believe me, but normally my flute playing is pretty decent. But before he could finish, several white-robed cultivators stepped through the main gate. They wore the Lan uniform, which resembled slow, soft billows of unadorned snow. The man standing at the head was tall, slim, and graceful, and around his waist hung not just a sword, but also a shower of white jade. When Lan Wangji saw him, he bent his head slightly in accordance with etiquette, and the man did the same in turn. He looked at Wei Wuxian, smiled, and said, "Wangji never brings home guests. What's your name?" When the man stood across from Lan Wangji, it was like seeing two sides of a mirror, except Lan Wangji's eyes were light like ceramic glaze, whereas the man's eyes were gentle, warm, and dark. He was Lan Huan, the chief of the Gusulan clan, Zewujun, Lan Shichen. Different places, water and soil, nurtured different kinds of people. The Gusulan clan had always been widely known for producing many beautiful men. But this generation's twin jades were unusually beautiful, even by the standards of the Lan clan. Though the two brothers hadn't been born at the same time, their appearances were very similar, and it was difficult to say whose was superior. But though they looked nearly identical, in disposition they were like night and day. Lan Xichen was gentle, warm, and open-hearted. In the world of cultivation, the former was considered first amongst all of the young masters in behavior and appearance, and the latter the second. Lan Xichen was every bit deserving of the title of clan chief. Upon seeing Wei Wuxian clinging onto the donkey, not a single odd expression crossed his face. Smiling from ear to ear, Wei Wuxian released the animal and greeted him. The Gusulan clan attached a great deal of importance to seniority and hierarchy. If he vomited nonsense in front of Lan Xichen, they would beat him with a stick all the way from the cloud recesses to the bottom of the mountain. But who would expect that just as Wei Wuxian was preparing to conspicuously extend his hand, Lan Wangji would glance at him and seal his lips shut. Lan Wangji's gaze returned to Lan Xichen, and he continued, speaking politely. "Brother, will you visit Lan Fangzun again?" Lan Xichen nodded. "We will be deliberating over the plans for the next discussion conference at Jinnin Terrace. Unable to open his mouth, Wei Wuxian trudged resentfully back to the donkey's side. Lian Fengdun was the current chief of the Lanling Jin clan, Jin Guangyao, one of Jin Guangshan's acknowledged illegitimate children. He was Jinning's uncle and the half-brother of Jinning's father by birth, Jin Zishuan, as well as the half-brother of Mo Shanyu. Though he and Mo Shanyu were both illegitimate, their fate was as different as heaven and earth. At Mo Manor, Mo Shanyu slept on the ground and was forced to eat others' leftovers, whereas Jin Guangyao occupied the highest position in the cultivation world, able to call the rain and summon wind if he so chose. If he wanted to call Lan Xichen to Jinnin Terrace, he did it. And if he wanted to hold a discussion conference, he did that too. But it was hardly a wonder that the Lan and Jin chiefs had such a sincere personal friendship. After all, they were sworn brothers. Lan Xichen said, "Uncle has taken the object you brought back from Mo Manor for inspection." Upon hearing the words Mo Manor, Wei Wuxian's interest couldn't help but be piqued. He felt his lips part. Lan Xichen had lifted the silencing spell. The clan chief said to Lan Wangji, "Not only is it rare for you to bring home a guest, it's also rare to see you thus happy. But be sure to behave hospitably, not like this." Happy? Wei Wuxian scrutinized Lan Wangji's face closely. How could anyone tell that he was happy? After watching Lan Xichen leave, Lan Wangji said, "Haul him in." Wei Wuxian was thus dragged into the place he had promised to never again set foot in. Prior to this, all who had entered the gates of Lan clan had been distinguished cultivators. The clan had never had such a guest before, so all the juniors involved in pushing, shoving, and pulling Wei Wuxian found the experience novel and a great deal of fun. Were it not for their clan's strict rules, they would have giggled the entire way. Lan Jingyi said, "Han Guangjun, where should we take him?" Lan Wangji said, "The silence room." The silence room? Wei Wuxian had no idea what was happening. Everyone else stared at each other in shock, afraid to make a sound. The silence room was Lan Wangji's study and bedroom. He never let anyone inside. Minimalistically furnished, the silence room did not host a single superfluous object. A chin table sat in front of a silk screen painted with drifting clouds which slowly changed with the wind. In the corner, sitting atop a three-legged incense stand, was a lattice-work incense burner made of white jade. A light smoke rose from it in delicate spirals, filling the room with sandalwood's cold fragrance. When Lan Wangji left to discuss important matters with his uncle, Wei Wuxian was shoved inside the room. But not long after Lan Wangji had stepped outside, Wei Wuxian's foot was also through the door. He strolled around the cloud recesses, and sure enough, he found he needed a jade token to pass the gates. Even if he climbed over the meters-high white walls, the wards would immediately fling him off, and furthermore, the stunt would attract all of the nearby patrolmen post-haste. Wei Wuxian had no choice but to return to the silence room. Regardless of the kind of difficulty he encountered, he was never truly anxious. He paced back and forth around the space, confident that sooner or later some solution would find its way into his head. That cool, clear scent of sandalwood pervaded the room. and although it didn't exactly trigger sentimental feelings, it had its own particular poignancy. He began idly speculating. Lanjan's scent must come from the fragrance drifting out of the incense burner. It probably sticks to his clothes when he's here practicing the guqin or meditating. After having these thoughts, Roshan couldn't help but edge toward the incense stand in the corner. As he approached, he noticed that the wooden floorboard beneath his feet was obviously different from the others. Curiosity piqued, he began knocking on the floor around him in all directions. In his previous life, he had done more than his fair share of grave robbing and sniffing out holes in the ground. So before long, he found and flipped the loose board. The fact that he had discovered a secret compartment in Lan Wangji's room was already a surprise enough for Wei Wuxian. But when he saw clearly what was hidden inside, he was stunned, speechless. Though it had been nigh imperceptible when folded into the sandalwood, once the wooden floorboard had been lifted, the scent of liquor filled the air, wafting from the 7 or 8 round, pitch-black jars inside the little square cellar below. Lan Wangji had indeed changed. Now he even hid liquor inside his room. Alcohol was prohibited inside the cloud recesses. Because of this, the first time Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji had met, they had gotten into a minor scuffle, and Lan Wangji had even knocked over a jar of Emperor's Smile that Wei Wuxian had brought up all the way from Gusu City at the base of the mountain. After he had left Gusu and returned to Yunmeng, Wei Wuxian had never had another opportunity to taste the renowned Emperor's Smile. For his whole lifetime, he always said that when he had the chance, he would return and try some, but he never did. There was no need to open the jar to figure out what kind of alcohol was hidden here. As soon as he smelled it, he knew it was Emperor's Smile. He had no idea that he would discover one day that someone who was as much of a stickler for the rules as Lan Wangji, who had never touched a drop of alcohol before in his life, had in fact dug out a secret compartment in his room for the purpose of hiding the forbidden drink. The heavens had truly rewarded him with his reincarnation. Wei Wuxian sighed ruefully as he downed a jar. His alcohol tolerance was very high, and he always craved it. After thinking for a moment, he concluded that Lan Wangji owed him a jar of Emperor's Smile, and after the debt had gone so many years unpaid, he surely deserved some interest as well. Thus, he drank another jar. Just as he had drunk enough to be tipsy, his mind had a flash of brilliance. How hard could it actually be to get a jade passage token if he really wanted one? Inside the cloud recesses, there was a cold spring with mystical properties, which the male disciples of the clan were permitted to use for cultivation. Some said it had the ability to calm hearts, cleanse minds, cool inflammation, these types of effects. When entering the cold springs, the disciples naturally had to remove their clothes, and after removing all of their clothes, they would hardly use their mouths to hold the jade tokens. Wei Wuxian clapped his hands and finished off the last mouthful of the jar that he was currently drinking. Glancing around the room, he found that there was no way to throw away the empty jars, so he filled them with water, sealed them, and hid them back where he had found them, returning the wooden board to its place atop the hidden cache. With his work complete, he went to look for a jade token. Though the cloud recesses had been burned down before the Sunshot campaign, their layout remained exactly the same when it was rebuilt. Relying on memory, he navigated it through the twisting obscure paths, and after not too long, he found the secluded, cold spring. The disciple who was supposed to guard the springs was very far away. Another region of the cloud recesses was dedicated to female cultivators, so they never came to use the springs. Moreover, the security was light, since no one in the Lun clan dared to do shameless things like hiding by the cold springs, spying. The situation made it very easy to fool around, conveniently allowing Revushin to do said shameless things. Very coincidentally, atop the white rock behind the thicket of orchids was a set of white robes. There was already someone here. The white robes were folded infuriatingly neatly to the point where they resembled a block of snow-white tofu. Even the forehead ribbon was folded without a single thread out of place. Revushin almost didn't have the heart to mess the arrangement up when he snuck out his hand to fumble through it for a jade token. As he passed through the thickets of orchid grass, his eyes swept around the cold spring until his gaze suddenly caught on the figure in the water. The cold springs weren't like hot springs. The water was so cold it stung to the bone, and there was no veil of hot mist permeating the air and bewitching the eye. Consequently, Revushin could see the upper back of the person in the springs with perfect clarity. The man was tall and slender, with lovely, fair skin, his hair dark as black lacquer, damp and hanging over one side of his neck. The lines of his waist were slim and sleek, both elegant and strong. In short, he was a beauty. But the reason Revushin couldn't tear his eyes away definitely had nothing to do with being stunned by the sight of this beautiful man bathing. However beautiful he was, Revushin wasn't really attracted to men. The actual reason he couldn't look away had to do with the things on the man's back. Dozens of scars were etched onto his skin, crisscrossing back and forth across his spine. These were whip marks. In the world of cultivation, there was a type of whip sects reserved for punishing disciples who had committed a grievous wrong. The scars from the whip's lashes never faded. Though Revushin had never been struck by it, Jiang Chang had. Despite racking his brains and trying everything, he had never come up with a method to lighten the shameful marks. Thus, Revushin would never mistake these scars. Usually, the one being punished was only lashed once or twice. The whip already taught a very harsh lesson, more than enough to engrave the episode into the wrongdoer's memory for their entire life. They would never dare make such a mistake again. Yet, by a conservative estimate, this person's back had at least 30 whip scars. What kind of sin could he have committed to be beaten so badly? If it had really been so disgraceful, why hadn't they just killed him? At this time, the man in the springs turned around. Beneath his collarbone, near his heart, there was a distinct, brand-like mark. As soon as Revushin laid eyes upon it, he was completely dumbfounded.